The second time I've done this, so I'm not going to, I'm just, it's easy going, it's light, and we can, I will edit, we can re-say stuff. I think I had to say the intro 7 times the first time I did this because I just kept like, saying whatever was coming into my head, which was not really an introduction. So whatever.
It sounded good.
Well, so there's one interview I've recorded that I haven't put out yet. So there's the intro that I did, which was the second thing that I did. Before that, I recorded one interview, and it was like I was so anxious, and it took me days to edit it. And so I'm hoping, it doesn't matter. Today is just going to go exactly how it goes, and I'm comfortable with you, and I like talking to you. So
yeah, just learning. I mean, it's just like asking questions, and it's like, this is your podcast. It's going to be shaped the way you want it to, not the way someone else is expecting you to shape it. And that's what's going to make it good. That's what made your first one good, and your voice is wonderful too, which really helps, so yeah.
This what fancy
it's your voice is good. You're very so.
Okay. Well, I can start by trying to introduce you. And then I did send you those questions, and we can keep it really open. I think, we'll get to it. But one of the things I thought was interesting was your initial response saying, I never really felt vulnerable as an artist, which I think is also a great perspective. So I don't have a mission. Like, I just want to talk to you about these things. And if you have a different experience, that's fantastic. Like, that's more interesting than just everybody saying they felt the same way about something.
Trust me, I'll say exactly what I feel. I'll be very honest. So I don't even really know what I'm going to say. So we're going to both find out something. Yeah.
You'll keep us guessing. Okay. But I will start by saying I am absolutely thrilled, Robert, that you agreed to do this podcast with me, because I've known you for many years now. And I respect you so much. I always thought I was so lucky to find you too, because it was a random internet search for a graphic designer and web developer. And I was brand new at being a consultant. You made me feel so comfortable. You were so good at your work from the very beginning. And I have never looked back since then.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
It's true. You're one of those people that I really am happy that I've had the opportunity to work with for, I don't want to date us, but decades almost.
Yeah, no, it has been a while, but I always really enjoyed working with you too, because I found you so organized and friendly and professional. And, when you're working for yourself, you'll come across all different kinds of clients. You're working with the public. So it's always really honestly, and I mean this a joy when I also find clients or are found by clients like you, and there's a nice connection. And I think we did some really great work together too.
We did. So we should sort of end the scripted part of this podcast where we've both said how fabulous we think we are.
I know it's hard because already I feel myself like, that's great. Like I'm turning into, so I'll try and keep it.
No, there's no pressure at all. I set us off by saying how fabulous you were, but I really meant it. And I'm actually really happy to have the chance to talk to you, because you do work that I think is really, really interesting too. So maybe you could just start by sharing some of the different kinds of projects you work on.
Well, generally my work is divided into, I think, two sort of spheres. On the one hand, there's the graphic design work that I've been doing since about the late 90s. I graduated from Concordia in communication studies, and back then nothing was digital. It was right at the beginning of things like Photoshop and digital sound editing. And we covered a bunch of different projects, and I ended up coming out of it just doing websites, which were brand new. And that sort of required other disciplines like graphic design, a little bit of animation, motion design. All these things were new and coming to the foreground. So I kind of dipped my toes in that. And then I was really lucky to find a few great clients. And I developed I guess you would say, a graphic design business that included web, animation, and print. So there's always been that side. And then on the other side, about the same time, I really loved playing video games. And I remember in the late 90s, there was a technology called Flash, which has recently been discontinued, but back then it was everywhere as a way to get animation on the web. And I sat down one day with it and I started making a video game about a flying dragon. And I remember I was sitting at my big computer with the giant, it was a white big screen, cathode ray, the whole bit, chiclet keyboard.
Yeah.
And I asked myself, why am I making this game? And then like this voice inside my head just said, just because you want to. You don't have to have this specific reason. You're not doing it for anyone. You're doing it because it's something that's inside you want to do it. So I made the game, and then that sort of led to the second part of my career, which is I also make games. And today I make games for mobile. I make open world games specifically for like iPad, for iOS, for Apple, and Android. And my career is basically split between those two. And I enjoy them both because they're both extremely creative, just in different ways. And I really like that I get to do something different almost every day.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And you actually sparked a memory for me as an aside, that model of just doing something because you feel like you want to do it. And I don't even know if that somehow got transmitted to my son, Josh, but the time that you made him a video game where he must have been 5 or 6, and he just decided that he was going to make this game called Smash Guys. And you were so cool because he would tell me something and I would share it with you and you would create something and it was in Flash and then you would send it back and Josh was like, okay, that's really cool. Okay. And then when you level up, you do this and you would do it. And it was an amazing experience for him.
I hope I had a good influence on him. And I remember that too. That was really cool. I mean, he's so creative. So it's really nice when you get that opportunity, I kind of think, to also see what kids are thinking, because they also give me a lot of feedback on my games and sometimes get a really great idea of what they like and they see things more clearly. It's
very cool. I think he was almost like a mini you in that respect. He was just doing it because he thought it was interesting. And you also gave him great ideas. It was a nice collaboration between a 5-year-old and a grown man, but you guys connected on this level of, we just think video games are cool and we're going to make some.
I remember an old episode of The Golden Girls, and Dorothy, one of the main characters, she was like, I think in order to communicate with a child, you have to think like a child. And then Rose came out all innocent. She's like clanging this thing, bang, bang, bang. And I guess I sort of think like a child because, part of my job is to kind of make dragons that fly around the world and I get paid for it, So I have to have this kind of childlike sensibility in order to do what I want to do. I have to kind of not grow up in a way in order to do what I want to do.
I think that's actually a compliment to you. I think that it shows in your work.
I'm glad. Yeah, I like that aspect, actually. I like keeping that childlike wonder.
I see it in, your work for corporate projects is super polished and clean and very beautiful. And I love the style of it. What you show in your video games, I don't know if you see, like you said, there's 2 parts of your business that both appeal to you in creative ways, that they give you that kind of creative outlet. There's something about your video games that are just so whimsical and beautiful. That is a quality I don't like. It's different from your graphic work or your web development work. It's dragons and young boys running through hills with sun glinting off a lake with these beautiful flowers that are blooming. And it's your work is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. And it's funny that you say that because I think there is a really distinct stylistic difference between the two. With my graphic design work, it actually comes very clear to me what my style is there. And I like simple, clean lines, bold colors. Almost all of my work exemplifies that somehow. And it's always simplify, simplify, simplify. And then in my games, I think part of what has set me apart, according to feedback from people, but also what I see, is that it's very messy. And it's not so polished like AAA video games, expensive video games, but I just throw a lot of dust in there, a lot of sunlight, a lot of mess, a lot of dirt, a lot of leaves. And that somehow kind of comes together in a more impressionistic, sort of naturalistic look. And I really like that because in my games, what I'm trying to do most is recreate nature, like recreate this natural feeling of you being outside in nature. So they are both creative and come from the same place, but they definitely have these 2 very separate styles to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Very organic, very whimsical, very sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
which would not have worked in our work together, unfortunately. I would love to have tried something more like that, and it wasn't the more traditional, structured, polished approach. Maybe we can look at that later. We can do something around that.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, multidisciplinary actions, I think, are where, growth really happens. And often we separate the two things. But maybe, somewhere someone is going to bring that messy, kind of unpolished sort of, aesthetic into something that's more professional and graphic designy. And I think there's room for all that. And you never know what's going to come out of those kinds of experiments.
Agreed. And actually, like, I'm just now going off on a tangent again, but I feel like this podcast is a little bit that. It is a little bit messy and organic, and it's not polished and it's not clean. And I don't think I want it to be. It's more of a free world, open world concept.
I think that's great because I love tangents and I love cross-pollination. I really do. I think it's healthy. I think that kind of this interbreeding almost makes everyone stronger and more diverse. So, kind of like almost like a multiculturalism of ideas. So, yeah.
So now I'm pulling the curtain back where before you thought I was organized and methodical, I actually wasn't, but I could maintain that because that's what I had to do for clients. But behind the curtain, total disorganized, organic mess. Getting things done in an organic, messy way.
Yeah, you have that ability to engage with polish when you need it. And I mean, obviously now it's becoming apparent that you have this incredible sort of artistic sunshine inside of you that wants to express yourself, because you were always interested in art right from the start. And I don't know if I can almost analyze you for a second.
We're not including this. No.
The opportunity seemed so apparent to be able to sort of just pursue that avenue, because I would say that pursuing kind of purely artistic endeavors in society is still frowned upon. And I was just speaking with a fellow artist the other day, and he said that he was so glad that he got to do art today. He does these weaves in Indonesia, really fantastic, beautiful. But he was saying how he wasn't encouraged to be an artist. So I think still a lot of people who become artists still have to kind of crack this sort of self-censorship, sort of break through this barrier in order to do what your passion says,
We're kind of in a very organic way weaving into the topic around vulnerability, because I think that is part of what's at the core of what we're talking about. This what makes you hesitate from stepping out and doing the kind of, I was going to say the kind of work. I don't know if I want to qualify it as work, but just the kind of activity that you want to.
I would classify it as work. I mean, sometimes, whether you get paid for it or not, I mean, it's still this career task that you take on. And it's just, I find that maybe when you think of something as being artistic, maybe it's kind of almost describing something that you really want to do. And on that note, I would also say that, I would think that there would be great artistry in dentistry even, or in medicine. And this kind of artistry, this pursuit of art is really about being yourself and doing something maybe not for the money as the initial impetus, which doesn't mean that you can't get paid for doing art, but it might not be the motivating factor. And that could hold some people back too, I think.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think money is one aspect of it. Earlier this week, I was thinking there's an age-old debate about craft versus art, and what does it mean to call something a craft versus an art. And I can't remember now the name of the book that I read that was a series of interviews. It was based on TV interviews that were done with craftsmen, craftspeople, woodworkers and blacksmiths. And the interviewer would usually ask, do you consider yourself an artist or a craftsperson? And there were different answers to that. And it didn't really I don't think it had a lot to do with what it is that you were doing. It might have a little bit more to do with how much of yourself or how revealing of yourself the activity is or the work is. So this might not be fair at all, but sometimes I think a craft is something that you do that's a bit more mechanical, that might be similar to what somebody else made. Whereas even if I'm doing weaving or tapestry or guitar making or whatever that activity is, it becomes an art form when I'm showing something of myself through it. That's quite different from what somebody else, a guitar that somebody else would make or a piece that somebody else would weave.
That's really interesting, and it's super complicated because I know in the game industry, there's this kind of long-standing debate about are games art? And then every now and then you have a game that comes out. For example, there's one called The Last Guardian, which was a sequel to another game called Shadow of the Colossus. And for whatever reasons, like their style and their story and the emotion that they had in it, those games were seen as art, kind of maybe one of the first games that was seen as art. But I mean, video games themselves, no matter whether they're, even if they're like, a huge Superman game or something, working with a big franchise, it's a culmination of a whole bunch of artists in concept art and people making things. So there's always art involved. So maybe craftsmanship versus art could kind of relate. And I don't want to stereotype this, but maybe possibly part of it could be that final product, how the final product is almost received and in what context it's received in. Like if I buy a table and I get it, then maybe I could say, well, it's from a craftsman because, I've sort of purchased it and has a specific, really clear goal. But then again, that person is probably an artist too, because you have to kind of give up something to become, I think, a craftsman. It's almost one of these Venn diagram situations where I don't think there's a clear delineation between the two.
Good. I prefer that, actually.
Yeah, me too.
There's a lot of dividing up of the world we do when we use words like that. So that was a misheaded thing where I misdirected saying like, this should count as art and this should count as craft. I think what I was trying to get at was, whether it's through craft or through art, this idea of this work being something that you reveal yourself through. I don't know how you feel about that in context of your own work, but when I think about vulnerability in art making or in craft work or in production of something, I think where I go with it is I feel vulnerable because I feel like I am showing something of myself out in the world and I have to risk it being accepted or not accepted. And I am of a certain way that affects me. And how would you respond to that?
Well, it actually makes me really curious what you feel you're showing that, might be received well or not. Because I wonder that too, like, what is it exactly that people are afraid to show? For example, I know one artist, he does this incredible erotic artworks that are I guess you would say quite shocking by, certain standards. And so is that more art? Is that more vulnerability? Like he has a real reason not to show that. And then, I think he should show it, but he has a social pressure not to, for example. And then I think other arts are maybe more accepted. But, if you're a weaver, for example, where would your vulnerability be in showing your weaving? Or is because weavings are so socially accepted, there is no risk in doing that. For myself, it's a really good question because I don't think I feel that vulnerable, at least showing the insides of myself in my art, because the whole point is that I want to express how I feel. So if I'm not expressing how I feel, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm not really doing what I want to be doing. And I'm very much a person who likes to do what I want to do and say what I want to say, kind of unfiltered. So I'd say for me, showing that vulnerability of the inside myself is really easy. For me, I don't find that revealing those vulnerabilities is a difficult thing, And I think that maybe for some people, revealing a vulnerability of yourself to other people is harder for some people than others. And maybe that's another reason why so many people don't become artists, because they're afraid to reveal themselves. And I think kind of the fear and vulnerability are two separate aspects, because I don't think you necessarily need to be afraid to be vulnerable. You know what I mean?
That's good. That's
Society
good. I like that a lot.
expects us to be afraid of that. but I do feel vulnerable in other areas making art. And for me, those are more logistical, business, technical. It's the idea of, because I make games, it's all these technical worries like, will my game work on this phone or that phone, and will someone be upset and then sue me because I couldn't do whatever, and then I won't be able to make art? And will I be able to make a living off this, not because I'm trying to make money from my artwork, but because I want to continue making more artwork, and to do that I have to make a living, and how do I do that? And then all these logistical concerns come in, and that's where I get stressed. That's where my fear comes in. That's where I get afraid. But I have to keep pushing myself forward and ignore those fears, because they'll shut you right down. They'll shut everyone right down.
Yeah.
We have to ignore them and move forward if we want to create something, no matter what kind of fear you have, no matter in what area.
That was perfect. That was awesome. I like that. I think it's an expansion around. I come at this from a certain perspective. And the wonderful thing about talking to different people is it opens up my mind to what vulnerabilities mean to different people. Well, the kinds of vulnerabilities they may, or the fears that they may have, is very different for different people.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely artists out there who are putting out material that is more revealing than what I do. I mean, I admit, like, I make video games, and I like to focus on story. I like to focus sometimes on topics like religion, which are somewhat controversial, the environment or nature. I like to have interesting characters. So yes, those things can be somewhat mildly controversial to certain people or vulnerable, but in general, it's not maybe as socially unacceptable as some other artworks might be. For example, Robert Mapplethorpe in the 80s, Mapplethorpe, I'm never sure how to pronounce his name, being basically censored from the Chicago Museum in the 80s. And then now, I mean, I just went and saw a retrospective of his work at Montreal Museum several years ago with my best friend's mom. And we're all just walking around there like middle-aged and just looking and stuff, and oh yeah, like no big deal. So yesterday's censored and revealing and shocking artwork is today's like nostalgic kind of trip through time. So it might be easier for me to not show my vulnerability through my art, because the art isn't that scary to make. That might be part of it.
Okay. If I could ask you, I wonder also sometimes about the balance of the vulnerability and openness you're willing to express in your own life, your day-to-day life, and the work that you do. And for myself, I see that I have the same challenges, or some of the same challenges, in revealing who I am in my day-to-day as much as I might in the work that I do or want to be doing. How would you feel about that in terms of how you express who you are and the openness with which you are who you are in your work versus in your day-to-day life?
I would say actually that the amount that I express myself in my personal life and in my work are probably pretty similar. I mean, in work, obviously, there's certain kind of conventions that you put on, just, how you write an email or how you say hello. And those are not even really restrictions. They're just kind of tools that you use in order to communicate more clearly. But I am really, for myself, I'm really a person, I don't believe in secrets. I think that secrets and censorships are always revealing of something we're troubling beneath. I think the only reason we have secrets are because people are ashamed of various parts about who they are. And that if you have a secret that's truly bad, then it should be put out into light of society. And if it's really bad, then we can say, okay, together, we know this really bad. Like, murder is bad, or just put it under the sun. But I think most of the secrets that people keep aren't really that bad. I mean, people kept a secret about being gay for a long time. I came out of the closet very early on, like in high school. I didn't want that to be an issue. I didn't want to lie about who I was. And I understand that it's not easy for everyone to do that, and circumstances are different, which kind of ties into what we were talking about before about, in different contexts, it may be easier for some people to show vulnerabilities than others. It may even be dangerous to show vulnerabilities in certain contexts too. But in general, I take that kind of openness that I think I have, because I'm always saying stuff. My friends are like, "You're shameless," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'll really say anything." But I just believe in being truthful. I think the truth is often hard to hear and it's often sticky, but I think ultimately it's the best way and the only way really to get to the root of what the world is about, what the truth is about. The way to get to the truth is to be truthful. So I like to try and apply that into what I do with my games and with my graphic design. But I'll say with the graphic design, there aren't many opportunities really for, maybe that is more of a craft, because there's not really a lot of opportunities for kind of disastrous like interpretation of my graphic design work. It performs a function really clearly, and I try and make it perform those functions as efficiently as possible to communicate as clearly as possible. Whereas my games are much more freeform. So yeah, I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, I have to say, just going back to what you said earlier, one of the things I always admired a lot about you and made me feel more comfortable was that you were open about being gay. And it made it easier for me to be open about being gay, where at that time at work, I wasn't saying anything to anybody. And nobody was asking me any questions about anything. And I'm sure they knew, but nobody was talking about anything.
Wow.
But with you, I could just be myself because you
That's
had
pretty.
that openness. I appreciated that a lot.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And I did not know that about your experience with that a bit, so that it was a little bit, keep some things, I guess, inside, you know?
And that's probably, what motivates some of my questions for you and in general is if you are holding back yourself in certain parts of your life, do you see that ripple effect across the board? And in myself, I do see that.
I definitely see myself, I self-censor myself today for sure.
Your
And
friends
I
would
think
be shocked. Your friends are like,
they
what?
do, yeah,
There's no
they do.
censorship
Well,
happening.
part of that has happened over time, almost iteratively. Like, I would be on Facebook or wherever, blah, blah, blah. And then part of it was understanding that sometimes I should kind of just pull back a little bit, just to sort of clarify, like, I don't have to die on every hill. I don't have to take on every battle, so it's just a question of just, thinking about some things through. Then the other part is, I feel, unfortunately, like lately, there is more a feeling of acceptable censorship in the world kind of happening. And I'm not really comfortable with that direction, because I think even unpalatable ideas, like I was saying, they kind of need to be said because they don't go anywhere. They just, you can't really sweep problems like homelessness under the rug, just move people to another part of the city. It doesn't make things disappear. You can't just outlaw, I'm mixed race and I've been called kinds of names, but I don't think you can just outlaw, kind of all this negative speech, because, these problems like racism, homophobia, they'll still fester and people will still feel them. And I feel that we need to talk about them. This is my personal opinion. I feel that we need to talk about them or to truly solve them. And I think that's incredibly difficult and incredibly painful thing to do. I think that not talking about things is incredibly seductive, and I completely get it too. And that has had kind of a chilling effect on what I say, for sure, because it's not uncommon that I write something on Facebook or on Twitter and I delete it 5 minutes later. And I have found myself actually doing that more and more over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, since a certain president came into town, and then the environment kind of changed, I think, regarding what we can and can't say. So I don't know where that's heading in terms of my work, but I don't feel that it's affected my work yet. My last game was about religion, and it did cross my mind that it might be controversial for some people. But I also did a game like 10 years ago with this barbarian macho character, and you could date like the woman or the male woodcutter. Is you were basically this bisexual character, and I didn't really care. And what shocked me the most was when people came at me for it. They were like, well, I just don't think a barbarian would like quit the war and make a garden, which is kind of the point of the game, the garden. And so it's just people were having trouble with, this kind of person, this character presenting as this kind of gender norm. engaging in an activity that they felt wasn't, connecting with like the stereotypical gender that he was presenting. And I just think that now, obviously, we've learned a lot about that, and people should just be free to be who they are. I think ultimately, I hope I don't self-censor more, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and, not speak my mind.
So that self-censorship came about because of the climate. Did it have to do also with your, being able to promote your games? Was it motivated a bit by that, or was it more personal? I just don't want to go there because it's an explosive time.
It was more personal. It's more about the climate for sure, because when I released that game where the main character is bisexual, I remember my previous game before that, it had some funding. It's my first game that's funded. And then I released that game, and there were all these producers interested in it. And then after they kind of played it, it was all of a sudden dropped like hot potato. And I mean, I have no proof that was the reason, but to me, it was pretty clear that once they realized that you could, be bisexual in the game, it was over. But I didn't care. I loved that game. I put it out. I didn't put it out to make money. That would have been like an extra sweet bonus. And I really feel that way about my games today too. Like, I don't censor myself when it comes to my games. I put out what I want to put out. I might massage it a bit in order to, get out my message of the particular game I'm working on. But I don't think I censor myself, and I wouldn't want to, because I wouldn't be being true to myself. And then it would sound super sensuous to say this way, but it's almost like a cliche, like I wouldn't be making art, but I think it's probably more complicated than that. But on the surface, that's kind of that story to make maybe art, great or otherwise. You need to show who you are. And that plays into what you're talking about, vulnerability. Like, if what you're showing makes you vulnerable, well, then you have to learn to show your vulnerability in order to make the art. So that's probably a process of showing your vulnerability that a lot of artists have to go through. But I wouldn't say that all artists go through that to the same degree.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And I think it also goes back to what you were saying before. It's about vulnerability, but also just about truth. You have to be willing to put what's true out there. And some people are more vulnerable about that than others. Some people are okay with it. Sometimes maybe, people hold back from putting the whole truth out there because they are anxious about how it's going to be received. I feel like you more are not. You are, I'm going to do my best to put what I truly feel out there, and the chips will fall.
Yeah. And I think that what you're putting out there, again, that context kind of comes in place, because, I'm gay, for example. So for me to live my truth, let's say, it's more controversial, or was more controversial than if I were straight and I was living my truth. So you might have two people living their truth and, creating art and just being themselves. But where that art intersects with the societies where the problems start to happen, that problem with vulnerability is actually kind of the result of shaming in society that sort of almost creates this vulnerability, because otherwise, aren't your vulnerabilities just really you? And I mean, isn't who you just are, isn't that just okay? Like, why does that have to be a weakness? I mean, like I said, unless it's something truly awful that every human being can agree on, but barring that, I think that you should be able to be truthful about who you are in your life. And that extends to your art, to your craft, to your job. It wasn't that long ago people could be fired from their job for being trans, for example, or for being gay, or any number of differences. So I think we're learning as a society to appreciate those differences more and not demonize them as much, and hopefully that will lead to not only people being more free to pursue art, but also to just be more free to be themselves in general in all spheres.
Absolutely. Love that. I love that. I just want to go back to something you mentioned, weakness. And it's still true that when you look up vulnerability in the dictionary, it defines vulnerability as weakness, something to avoid, something that's bad. And I didn't ask you up front, how would you define what it means to be vulnerable?
Like in general, just
in general, and then maybe for you, what does it mean? How do you feel?
Scared. I feel like vulnerability means that you're scared, that there's fear. It's a really good question. It's like if you're vulnerable, you're going to expose yourself to harm. You know, maybe it's mental, maybe it's physical. And so you step back. It's like if you touch like a hot flame and it hurts and you step back. And I guess like in case of vulnerability, it's something that can happen before you even do something, before you even take action, which maybe kind of links that idea of self-censorship. Maybe vulnerability is almost engaging in some kind of self-censorship that holds you back. It's something that holds you back, I guess is how I would describe it. Vulnerabilities hold you back. Right. And there's also that flip side that says showing vulnerability is a good thing. So I feel like it would take more thought, but I feel like there's something in there about the strength we get from showing vulnerabilities. So I guess going by the dictionary definition, there's strength and something positive in showing your quote unquote weaknesses, which I guess if you go on that further, there's strength in showing your truth, who you are, because it's who you are that's being framed as a weakness. It's who you are is being framed as a vulnerability. But in the end, showing your vulnerability is just showing who you are. And we're afraid to do that in different levels. Like I said, I might be pretty shameless in general, but I also delete those tweets now and then, you know? So everyone's got some level of, you know, reticence to show vulnerability on some level, but there's so many different levels of it, you know, so many different kinds of vulnerability. And hopefully in your podcast, you can find even more about this, because I think, you know, it's such a wide topic. It's so interesting. Like, what are all these levels? What are all these kinds of things that people are feeling? All the different experiences different people feel about this.
I'm having awareness grow as I speak with you. Like, just my understanding of, I love the idea of vulnerability as just showing your truths, just showing things about yourself. Because some of the things about oneself are not so pretty, and some of them are okay. And to be okay to show the good and the bad and the ugly. I almost find it easier sometimes to do it with people I don't know than with people I do know. So it's easier for me to share certain things about myself with somebody I don't even know. Why? Than to do it with someone who I'm close to. And that's a whole psychotherapy session of itself. We don't have to go into that right now, but I love the idea of vulnerability, being open to sharing who you are, the good stuff and the not so good stuff, and saying, but that's okay, because it's still a reflection of who I am.
Yeah. And I want to just say, you can edit this out if you want, but I think that you shouldn't be afraid of putting some of that psychotherapy into it, because you're also part of this, you know what I mean, right. This discussion, and how you feel, I also learn from you. And I have so many questions. Sometimes they'll say something like, really, how come you're, you know, we're afraid to tell people that you don't, like, that's all something that can be a learning experience for me also. You know, I like to learn from people. So don't be afraid to, you know, just because you're the host doesn't mean that you can't show your own vulnerabilities.
That's so good. I open the floor. Go ahead and ask whatever questions you want.
Well, my only question that I remember was just, I really wonder, how come you maybe feel more comfortable sharing, you know, vulnerabilities or intimacies with people you don't know than with people you know? Like,
I've actually had to think about that this week. And I think so far, what it means for me is, because the people that know you can leave you if they don't like what they heard. If you're sharing something with people you don't know, it's with the general public, it's with, you know, maybe somebody you meet once and you never talk to again, then I don't have a problem, because I have no connection with those people. But if it's somebody I care about and I share something that they don't like, then I risk them walking away.
That is fascinating. And it's the last thing that I actually thought that you would have said.
Was there, what was the other answer? What's behind door number 2?
You know what? I didn't know what I expected, but I didn't expect something so revealing, I guess, actually. And I think a lot of people probably feel that way. I know that for me, my father left when I was very young, and then he passed away when I was like 20. So he never came back home type thing. And it really shaped me. And I was terrified of people leaving me forever, you know, and so I definitely have grown up with that same fear. Although I feel really comfortable sharing things with people who are close to me. And I guess that I feel that, like, if you share something with someone who's close to you and they leave you, then that's kind of about them. And then maybe they weren't the right person to sort of really see who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like you risk losing security, you know, of something, but you have to take that risk if you want to find, you know, the people that really, really connect with you, you know? So it's interesting because this is vulnerability in art, but it totally intersects with, you know, so many other disciplines and the way that you and I were even raised, and the experiences that we bring to the table as individuals. Absolutely. Also, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for answering that.
So, well, I mean, it's something I'm only becoming aware of more and more now. And I actually had the ridiculous aha moment of thinking, and it's not a total accident, I'm doing a podcast around vulnerability in life and art when I'm living through the experience of trying to become more vulnerable in my life, and consider what kinds of work, or even just the idea of calling myself an artist, is just not going to happen anytime soon. That for whatever reason, that's like a label that makes me feel like a total imposter.
A lot of people feel the same way. And you are an artist, because I remember when I started seeing your art, I was like, like, Sarah making this stuff? Like, where, you know, I'm like, wow, because I mean, you're creating beautiful things. So you've obviously always had this ability. And like I said, I was kind of so shocked that it was kind of hidden or behind the curtain, you know? But I mean, you're definitely an artist in as far as I can see. Like, you're creating things. You know, like your act of creating stuff, it's part of what makes you an artist. You know, like your actions speak louder than your words, and the words are where the labels are. And the labels may say you're not an artist because the expectations say that you're not. And I had expectations that you were not an artistic person because I knew how organized you were. And I was shocked when I saw some of your artwork. I was really surprised when I saw your tattoo. I was really surprised when I saw this, you know, new image. But it felt like it really fit you. It surprised me maybe that you were showing it, but it wasn't like, who is this person? I don't know who she is. It was more about peeling back the layer and, oh, this is who Sarah really is. And it's very clear that this is who she really is. And I love seeing that. And I hope that your experience with people has kind of helped you to show that too. And then you're going to help people with your organization. I mean, I would never do a podcast. It's like, oh, got to organize it, got to edit all this stuff.
You're doing one right now, but we're collaborating on it.
We are, but you're the glue that's holding it together, and you're using your organizational skills to kind of contribute to this discussion. I think that this is going into discourse about art in general, you know? So it's like you can contribute using those same organizational skills to the discourse of art, you know? And in this case, through the vector of the idea of vulnerability in art. And I think some other topics that we're discussing too, but art that intersect too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there is a part too, where just like you said, you see your graphic design work has a certain character to it and it allows you to be a certain way and express certain things. And then the game design is different, but still just as much a part of you as the graphic design work. And I think for me, if I say, oh, you know, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that, what you said. And if I could see myself as an artist, or I see who I'm becoming, it doesn't take away from the other parts of me who is the corporate consultant. That's also a part of me. And I will walk into an office with an outfit that sort of is mostly corporate, and I'll probably have long sleeves. And that's where I do actually still have a challenge, is that I will wear long sleeves. I won't let my tattoos show if I'm meeting a corporate client for the first time, especially, or the first few times, until they get to feel like we're going to have a good, productive relationship and we're working well together. And it's almost like tattoos are like my new gay, or like the things that I used to hide about myself before. And now I'm more open about them. There's new things that I hide about myself. But it's an ongoing challenge just to decide, because there's also an art to showing who you are in a particular moment that just fits the context and feels right. You can't be all the parts of yourself all the time. I feel like I do have to choose which persona or which aspects of myself I'm going to make more prominent.
I think it's great actually that you have those skills, those corporate skills. So I think those are positive things too. And I definitely want to say that I don't think that, like, you know, art is wonderful, anything corporate is horrible. Like, these are
Agreed.
all different kind of skills that, you know, used in moderation around the world contribute to, you know, humanity, like succeeding moving forward.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, I mean, you can hide your tattoos as long as it's truthful, that in hiding them, you're not giving people the opportunity to see, for example, that, you know, a woman with tattoos can also be a great business person.
Sure.
And then that kind of, it doesn't do anything to dispel that idea that, you know, maybe people with tattoos aren't capable of stuff. That's not like your responsibility to do that, for example. But I think that you could show your tattoos. And I think the reason that you don't is because it comes again to the security. It's almost like security is like the antithesis of creating art in a sense, but security is necessary often. It's necessary always to some degree, but you have to sacrifice some of that security, and you have to sacrifice that idea that someone might leave you, that client might leave you because they saw your tattoos. And quite frankly, if they left you because they saw your tattoos, I think that speaks more about the client than it does about you. It might have a real world effect that you lose that income and you lose that security, and that may not be something that you're able to take on right now. And I totally get that. But let's be clear that, you know, why we're hiding ourselves is because we're trying to keep the security. And let's at least be honest about that, even if we're not ready to come out of the closet or to, you know, say our pronouns or reveal ourselves in however way yet, you know. But I hope that more of us take that risk to show ourselves, you know, because I think that, again, it leads to a more truthful society. I think is more emblematic of who we actually are, not who we are labeling ourselves to be.